Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome back to Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get you started off with 5 great stories to help you ease into the upcoming weekend. Today's topic of discussion is strange and troubling children, and I think I've got some pretty good stories to embrace the idea. Starting us off, we have a story about a babysitter who runs afoul of a troublesome tyke and his lost teddy. So let's hear a story about his lovey.
Everyone had heard of the throne, but very few people had ever seen it. The woodland seat was something of a local legend. If you follow the river into the woods, turn east at the huge rubber tree at the fork, and walk into the setting sun, you'll come to the Devil's Clearing. In the clearing, a place where nothing is said to grow, sits a chair of stone. If you sit on the chair, you'll be cursed by the devil himself for all time. It's a story I've heard since I was old enough to go to sleepovers, and it's a story I've always wanted to prove or disprove. People have gone into the woods, and I remember the first time someone showed me shaky cam footage from a camcorder of a weird stone chair with faces carved into it. It was later proven to be a fake. The chair was something they'd made themselves and shot at night, but other people claimed to have gone into the woods and found it, their videos proving either better or worse than that first bit of wobbly cinematography that I watched on a couch at my friend John's house. But they all fed the fire of my enthusiasm. It's always been my dream to see it, the real seat. And when Mrs. Raggles assigned us a final project about urban legends for senior English class, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. The assignment was actually about the cause of urban legends, and she wanted us to make our own. When I asked if we could make our project a search for the woodland seat, she looked almost tickled. This wouldn't have anything to do with John's senior project for AV, would it, she asked, giving me a little wink. It might, I hedged, as good as telling her our intentions. John and I have been friends for years, and his interest in movies, especially making them, has been ongoing since the two of us were in elementary school. John got his first camera when he was 6, some cheap thing that his dad had picked up from Toys R Us after John practically begged him for it. I'd say John definitely got his money's worth, because we spent the next 4 years making our own short films and epic movies in the backyard. Through the years, John's cameras may have changed, but his interest in filmmaking hasn't. He often calls on me and our friends, Sean and Fred, to star in his latest project, and this would be no exception. I got enough battery packs and memory cards to reward for 3 straight days, he told us as we sat in his garage and suffered through his pitch meeting. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to shoot the next found footage masterpiece. John's project, his senior film thesis, was about urban legends too, specifically their place in horror films. He wanted to make the woodland seat the antagonist in his new found footage movie, the witch in his Blair Witch Project, in other words, and use us as his bumbling teen cast that goes looking for it. I was looking forward to using this trip to write my own paper for Mrs. Raggles, but Sean and Fred were just looking for an excuse to go camping for a few days in the lush woods that surround our town. We'd all grown up in the area, and the woods weren't unknown to us. We all enjoyed camping, right up until the first winter chill sent us back inside every year. And I, too, was looking forward to spending some time in the woods, cooking hot dogs and s'mores as we told stories and just hung out this weekend. So when we told our parents we'd see them Monday night and headed into the woods Friday afternoon, we were prepared to spend the next 3 days in nature. We had plenty of food, plenty of water, and we were properly prepared with a 4-man tent and sleeping bags. It was April, and the weather was already becoming unseasonably warm, so we didn't think we needed anything too strenuous. John was carrying his film equipment, his camera already out, and the three of us were carrying the stuff we would need for camping and survival, acting as his trusty pack mules. As we came to the river, the surface frothing with the late-season snowmelt from the nearby mountains, John told me this would make a great place to film the intro. The river is, after all, the first leg of the journey. From here, we set out to find the woodland seat and write our names for all to see across history. I'll never forget the grin that spread across his face at that moment. It was a golden moment, but nothing golden is made to last. He counted me down as I stood beside the river, preparing to give my lead-in statement. Fred and Sean had unanimously decided that I would do most of the speaking lines for this little movie. Neither of them really wanted to learn any of the lines that John wanted read, and I had the most video-worthy narration voice, they said. I think they just wanted to goof off on our camping trip, but to be fair, so did I. This is the Leftree River, the start of our journey. I wasn't sure I could even be heard over the rushing rapids, but John gave me a thumbs up and I struggled on. Legend says that if you follow the river until you come to a huge old rubber tree, you turn east and walk into the woods until dusk, you'll come to the Devil's Clearing and find the woodland seat. Those who sit on it are cursed, tormented for all eternity for daring to sit where the devil himself once took rest. Tonight, we intend to find that seat. And cut, John said, hitting the stop button as he nodded slowly. Very nice, love it. So what happens if we don't find this rubber tree? Sean asked as we shouldered our packs and headed deeper into the woods. I guess we just wait till we find the fork in the river, I said, after thinking about it for a few seconds. What if we don't find that? Fred asked, taking a sip from his water as the leaves smushed wetly beneath our feet. Boys, you're missing the point, John said. Which is, Fred asked. The point isn't to find the woodland seat or not. We're here to follow the instructions and see if we find anything or not. That's the project. The legend is what brought us here, the power of the urban legend itself. And now we seek to learn where it can take us. Fred laughed. So this could all be a wild goose chase is what you're telling us. I snorted and bumped him with my shoulder. You're getting a 3-day vacation out of it, Fred. Buck up. We followed the river as the afternoon rattled on. The woods were nice this time of year. Summer was on the cusp of arrival, and everything was green. The water would be too cold for swimming, though I suppose Sean might try. Sean liked the cold. He was built for it, and he would probably take a swim tomorrow before we set off. None of us figured we would make it to the Devil's Clearing by sunset today. We'd set up camp, cook some dogs, do some fishing, and tomorrow we'd proceed on. We were camping, after all, so what was the point of hurrying? We walked most of the first day. We weren't going very fast. We'd been at school all day, and we weren't in any real hurry anyway. Monday was a holiday to boot, and our parents knew where we were and wouldn't expect us home till Monday night. We talked and joked, the usual high school boy banter filling our afternoon. But as the sun began to set, we started looking for this tree or this fork. We had been assured that this was the way to go by some kids who had totally been to the Devil's Clearing, and that too was part of the project. If we couldn't find our way by the urban legend alone, then what was the point? It was starting to get dark when we came to the rubber tree. It had to be the one from the stories. For one, it was huge. It was far larger than any normal tree I'd ever seen, and the leaves left very little mystery about its type. It was also smack in the cleft of the river, the water diverting east and west from there, and it seemed like a good place as any to set up our tent. Sean started assembly as Fred and I went to collect firewood. We left John to set up our fire pit and returned with wood to find the pit dug and the tent already erected. As proper dark fell around us, we filled the woods with the smell of roasting weenies, canned chili, and s'mores. So how do you reckon the chair curses you? Fred asked, blowing the fire off his blackened hot dog before laying it across a piece of white bread. "Dunno," John said, around a mouthful of meat, and I just shrugged. "I thought you were the expert here," Sean said to me, as he closed his s'more into the metal sphere he used to toast the whole edifice. "I mean, I know the chair is supposed to sit in the clearing, but I don't actually know anything about what it does. There are no stories about how it curses you, so I guess no one's ever been stupid enough to try to sit in it." "Or," John said after swallowing his bite, "it's so bad that it stops anyone from talking about it." We discussed it a little more as the night went on, but as the food was packed away and the fire was doused, we all retired to our sleeping bags for some much-needed rest. I think all of us thought about the seat a little as we drifted off, but it was hard to focus on much after such a long day of hiking. The next day was spent swimming in the river, fishing, going over what we would do that night. John explained how we would come on the clearing at dusk, the sun making a great backdrop for the film. Sean would sit in the chair, pretend to get possessed or something, while the rest of us ran into the woods. There'd be lots of heavy breathing and shaky cam, and then we would begin recording once we had got back to camp. We'll explain how Sean went missing, and then we'll stage some weird noises or something as we record inside the tent. "What happens if we find the chair before dusk?" Fred asked. "Then we stop or make circles till the time is right." "What happens if we don't find the place at all?" Fred asked. John shrugged. "We shoot a piece saying that our search was fruitless and that the legend remains just that." So, as the sun began to sink behind the trees, we set off towards it. From the start, today's hike seemed different. The walk yesterday had been filled with talk and jokes, but today the wood seemed to scowl at the noise we were bringing into its depths. I didn't know right away if the others noticed, but I started to believe that they felt it too. Sean had tried to initiate jokes more than once, but ended up looking around guiltily when the laughter became too loud. Fred was the same way, shushing us more than once before looking around as if to ask why he had done that. John was oblivious, of course, his camera taking it all in as we plotted. If anything, he probably thought we were playing into his vision and was glad for the implied tension. I found myself watching the sun as it rode lower and lower in the sky, not sure if I was dreading being in these suddenly silent woods or finding the thing I'd always wanted to see. The closer we got, the more sure I was that we would find it, and that scared me. I could believe that the devil had come to this place, could believe that he had walked this very path, and I found myself looking down as if I were looking to see hoof prints. No bird song graced this place, none of the usual sounds from insects as they anticipated nightfall, and the silence was unnatural. The woods were lush, the trees thick, but the whole place felt wrong. I didn't have a word for it at the time, but I do now. The word I was looking for was blighted. When do we get to this thing?" Sean asked as he wiped his forehead. He turned to look at me, but I just shrugged. It said we walk towards the sunset, and then you find it. "Well, it better hurry up," Sean said. "We're losing the light, and we'll be setting up camp in the dark in another hour." The sun was getting low beyond the trees, and I realized he was right. The story had never actually said how far you had to walk, just that you had to follow the setting sun. Who knew how far one would actually have to go, or how long you'd have to slog before you got to the seat? We walked for another 20 minutes or so before we began to see something ahead, something that thinned the trees as we walked. The shadows were gathering as we approached the clearing, and it seemed that they gathered around the large and intimidating chair. "Holy shit," John breathed. "It is real." Boy, was it ever. The chair was roughly 5 feet tall and as wide as a lazy boy recliner. It looked to be made of concrete, set with carvings of gems that were painted on by a deft hand. Across the back of the chair, right where a person's back and head would sit, were 3 gray faces with red eyes and open mouths. They all looked identical, but the more I looked, the more I realized how different they all were. One appeared to be crying, another laughing, the middle one simply scowling. The whole construct looked like it would be at home in a mini-golf course or a weird maze attraction, or even a temple found randomly in the middle of the woods. It looked as out of place in the clearing as a dining room set, and as much as I wanted to see it, I couldn't bring myself to get too close to it. It was wrong. Its very essence was foul, and I couldn't comprehend why I'd ever wanted to find this thing in the first place. As John recorded the thing, he pulled his eye away long enough to wave his hand and try to get Sean's attention. He wanted him to go sit in the chair, as they had discussed, and the fact that he was still standing there frustrated John. Sean, for his part, seemed willing enough to comply, but was unable. He was frozen in place, staring at the chair as if he had never seen a chair before in his life, and John pointed at him and then back at me as he tried to get him to go. Sean shuddered as I shook him, looking at me almost dreamily as I got his attention. "Go sit in the chair," I whispered, and Sean nodded slowly as he approached it. He was stopped, however, when Fred pushed him out of the way and made to plant himself on the seat. "What the hell is he doing?" John whispered. I didn't know how to answer him. The two struggled with each other, and the fight would have looked theatrical if I didn't know they weren't acting. Both of them had this blank look, the kind of look you got when you're listening to someone on the phone while you do something else. Fred won their little scuffle, shoving Sean back hard enough to make him fall on his butt, and claimed his prize. He took his seat on the throne, a look of deep satisfaction stretching across his face that slowly became something more exalted. Sean just sat there, looking at him with ambivalence, and as John stepped towards him, something happened. As he sat there, basking in the glow of his newly won seat, Fred's skin began to blister. At first it was just general reddening that I nearly missed in the diminishing light. It was something I could have set aside as just sunburn, until the blisters began to appear. His arms and face broke out, the pus-filled sores growing and bursting in fast motion. The blood and pus ran down his arms and the seat of the chair, and as the sun set, his skin began to boil off his bones. He looked like the guy from Raiders of the Lost Ark as his bones began to show through his skin, and as he basked in whatever glow he was experiencing. As he liquefied in the woodland seat, I saw Sean get up and shove Fred's distinctly drippy skeleton out of the chair so that he could take its place. I tried to stop him. I called his name as I came towards him, but he showed no hesitation in the face of Fred's sacrifice. I looked back at John, expecting abject horror, but he had taken the camera away from his eye, and I could see him crying as he watched Sean begin to redden. Not crying in terror or anguish. That would have been easily explained. John was crying in exultation, like a priest who's seen the face of God. John, we have to go now," I said, shaking him. He didn't seem to hear me. He had eyes only for the quickly blistering Sean. John, I yelled, shaking his arm. "We got to get away from here. We need to tell someone what happened. We need to get Sean out of that thing. We need to..." But when I turned back, it was already too late. Sean's skin was melting off his bones, the white already visible, and as his eyes liquefied in his sockets, I tried to pull John away. "John, please," I begged. "Please, we don't have to do this. Don't." But he was already walking towards the chair. As it finished with Sean, he shoved the skeleton out of the seat and sat down amongst the goo and the rot that lay there. That was when I noticed something else. Something I hadn't until Sean's skeleton hit the earth. Fred's bones had disintegrated into powder. A powder that was already being taken away by the forest breeze. I started to run, but something caught my eye before I could get out of the clearing. I saw the camera, the little handheld that John brought into the woods, and I scooped it up before beating a hasty retreat. I fled like a coward, leaving my best friends behind, and I prayed I would never see that cursed chair again. I stumbled through the woods for 3 days, eating whatever I found and drinking from the stream when I finally got back to it. I wished many times that I had picked up one of the bags on my way back out of the clearing, a tent or some food at least, but all I had was the camera and the clothes on my back. I thought about the tent many times as I lay shivering on the damp forest floor, watching the trees for anything, the shadow of the chair, maybe the walking corpses of my friends. I wasn't sure which I was more afraid of seeing, but I just knew that both would be after me before I could escape. When the search party found me on Tuesday, I was afraid my fears had come to pass. They took me to the hospital, but when the police tried to question me, I just handed them the camera and trembled in the face of their questions. That was years ago, nearly a decade, but it's something I never forgot. I haven't seen the footage I gave the police. I have no desire to. The officer who reviewed it said it was the most disturbing thing he'd ever seen, but it did exonerate me of the crime. I think they might have been planning to look further for the bodies of my friends, but after seeing that tape, they scrapped the idea. There's no sense in looking for kids who were no longer there, and less sense in risking officers who might decide to have a seat as well. I lost my best friends that night. Sometimes it feels like the chair cursed me after all. Everyone in town assumed I had something to do with their disappearance, though they never got up the courage to say it to my face. I ended up leaving town to attend college, and I've never seen any reason to go back. Kids, however, still go missing in those woods. I can't help but wonder how many of them are lost to the woodland seat. So if you find a strange chair in the forest, steer clear. It's made for only one occupant, though it will gladly accept you as long as you can bear it.
So keep a close eye on that bear if you intend to watch this little tyke. Coming up next, we have a story about a boy seeking a play date with some children who may be a little beyond the pale. So let's hear a story about hide and seek with the missing children.
So, Bobby, what do you want to do after school? Bobby and I had been friends since pre-K, and we always hung out after school. We usually rode bikes or went fishing or did any number of other things, but Bobby had a weird look on his face today, and I suspected that today's activities might be a little out of the ordinary. He had been talking to some of the other kids at lunch, 5th graders, and God knows what they had told him. Many of them were the kind of boys to go off into the deep woods or explore the abandoned house on Cranmore Street, and I shuddered to think what sort of trouble they might get Bobby and I up to if he took them seriously. Well, Jesse, I think today we're going to the park. I looked at him funny. The park? That's a little babyish, isn't it? Maybe if we were going to ride the swings or something, but we're not going for that. That got me curious. Which park are we going to, Bobby? Bobby smiled, and it reminded me of the smiles of those 5th graders who sometimes try to get younger kids into trouble. We're going to the park over by the Drummond Apartments. I gasped. I knew exactly which park he was talking about, and he must have lost his mind. The Drummond apartment complex were a place that everybody had heard of. It was where the guys at the steel field lived when they were off shift, the place the log truck guys lived when they weren't driving big rigs, the kind of place that my dad said You could purchase some time with a woman if you couldn't get one of your own. My mom would have smacked him if she'd heard him talking like that, but it was just Dad, and sometimes he said things that he probably shouldn't have said around a child. Drummond Apartments were also next to the park that the city had closed after those 5 kids went missing. Everybody knew about the missing kids, the ones that had gone missing back in '98. Nobody was sure where they had gone, but everyone agreed that they'd been playing in the Drummond Park, a park at the edge of the woods. Other people said that now the park was haunted, and that if you went there at night, you could see ghost people at that park, as they played or did whatever it is that ghost people did. No one was sure if they were the missing kids or if they were just ghosts that had been brought about by all the sadness that had followed the place. But all the kids at school talked about them, and we all agreed that they probably existed. "Why in the hell are we going there?" I asked him. "Because the big kids told me about how I could play hide and seek with them." That piqued my interest. "What? Like playing hide and seek with ghost people?" He smiled. "Yup. They said if you go there in the afternoon, just as the sun's setting, you could call out to one of them by name and play hide and seek. It sounded pretty fun, so I figured we'd try it. Unless, that is, you're a baby." I bristled a little. "I'm no baby." "Good," he said. "Then you won't mind if we play Nintendo at your house until the time comes." I almost laughed, thinking this was just some ploy to play my new game system. The N64 had just come out, and my aunt, whose husband was said to be richer than Croesus, had gotten me a bunch of games for it. Bobby's family was not well off. I don't even think they had a TV, and he liked to come over and play games a lot. I didn't mind. Bobby was my friend, and friends shared, so when we sat down to a game of Mario Kart, I assumed that would be the last I'd hear about the Shadow Kids or anything like that. We'd play Mario Kart on my Nintendo for most of the afternoon, and as the sun continued to sink, I thought maybe he'd forgotten about it, and he'd remember that it was going to be dinner time soon and ask to stay. Instead, at about 5:30, he got up and told me it was time. "Time for what?" I asked. "Time to go play some hide and seek," he said. I winced as I hit the pause button on the controller, honestly having forgotten about the whole thing. "Come on, Bobby, let's just play some more Mario Kart and then eat dinner. We don't have to go all the way out there on a dare. I bet they're just messing with us anyway." Bobby was already heading out the door to my room, but he turned and looked back at me as I continued to beg him to call it off. "I'm going with or without you. I want to see what's out there, and I'll remind you how much of a baby you are at school if you don't come with me." That pretty much settled it, and I hesitantly came with him as we went to the park to see what all the fuss was about. We got to the park about an hour before sunset, which would leave us just enough time to play a quick game and then head home before Mom started getting worried. If Mom had known where we were, she would have been worried anyway. We had both been told not to come here by our parents, and Bobby's mom would have had a bird if she had known he had gone anyway. I think all the adults in town thought the place was haunted as much as the kids did, though most of them were probably too adult to say as much. Even before the incident, the place had been creepy. The kids who played there, mostly being local ones that lived in the apartment complex. The other kids played at one of the other parks in the area, and it was well known that homeless people sometimes spent the night there. There were no homeless people there today, and as we came into the play area, I remembered thinking I was already seeing ghosts. It wasn't like the ghosts in the movies. They weren't wearing bed sheets or looking like zombies. It was more like moving TV static. As I watched, they were wavy images that walked around the little area, and they made my eyes hurt a little as I tried to focus on them. They were human-shaped, but definitely not human beings. It was like someone's shadow had gotten up and decided to amble around. No wonder there were so many rumors about there being ghosts here, especially with these things walking around. "Okay," Bobby said, and he shook his arms like he was getting ready to perform a magic trick. "The bigger kids say that all you have to do is call out to one of them by name, and they'll play hide and seek with you. You can't get caught, but if they can't find you in 60 seconds, then the game is over, and you have to start again." "What happens if they catch you?" I asked hesitantly. Bobby shrugged. "They didn't say, but they made it sound bad. Probably best that they not catch you." That was far from reassuring, but Bobby didn't give me a lot of time to talk him out of it. He screwed his face up, like he was trying to remember something, and then he looked over at the weird ghost people and said a name that I was unfamiliar with. "Lucius Ryder." I didn't know the boy, but I recognized the name. They had certainly said it enough times at the assemblies. They would read them out over and over again, like they thought that one of us might be able to identify them just because we heard the name for the 1,000th time. We were all nervous about what had happened, but none of us really knew what was expected of us at these assemblies. Did they think we'd just remember information all of a sudden? Fat chance of that. Most of us could barely remember what we had for breakfast that morning. One of the shadow people broke itself off from the rest and walked slowly towards us. Terry was looking at it as if he thought this was the coolest thing he'd ever seen. But I was very little pleased with the results. It had come a little too willingly, like it wanted us to call it. And I was no expert on ghosts, but I knew it usually wasn't a good idea to invite things in that wanted you to call them. "Lucius Ryder, we challenge you to hide and seek. We hide, you seek. Do you accept?" The ghost thing didn't nod, but it did sort of glitch forward and then straighten again. It lifted its hands to cover its lack of eyes as it began to resonate, its body pulsing outward. Bobby grabbed me by the arm and said we needed to hide. I didn't know how long we had, but one look at that thing told me I did not want to be found. We both tore off into the playground, and one look at the tube slide told me that was the place I wanted to be. Bobby kept moving after I broke off, and I got to the top of the tube just as the resonating sound ended. It was like an echo in a cave when it finally stops bouncing off the walls for longer than you expected. I figured it must mean that the ghost kid was done counting. I climbed into the tube, positioning my feet so that I'd stop myself halfway down, and tried to hold myself there so I wouldn't be seen. My arms and legs started to get tired pretty quickly, but I only had to do it for a minute, and I thought I'd probably be fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I was counting in my head, pretty intent that this would be my first and last game. Bobby really should have told me the stakes before I agreed to do this, and as my arms shook a little, I heard something strange coming near the mouth of the slide. It was like TV static, or maybe that weird clicking sound you get from records, but it seemed to make me stiffen my arms a little more. I didn't want this thing to find me, and I hoped that Bobby had a pretty good hiding place. It moved away from the mouth of the tube and went along the side like it was looking for something. It probably hadn't thought to put itself in the middle of the tube, the position far too precarious, and I gritted my teeth as I continued to count. 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I could feel the sweat running down my arms and legs, and my legs began to shake as we hit the midway point. I believed it had moved away, but I couldn't be sure. It was the scaredest I had ever been in my life, and I'd spent a lot of time staying awake and listening for monsters in the closet. This was different somehow, like a movie where the effects are a little too good. I could feel my arms starting to give out, but I wouldn't be much longer now. 60 seconds, and then I could run home with the knowledge to never come here ever again. 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. I was getting ready to slide down and make a run for it when I heard the sound again. It was coming around the side of the slide, getting much too close to the opening, and I was afraid I was about to get caught. What would happen if it found me? Would it hurt me? Would I join their little ghostly troop, or would it be something worse than that? I didn't know, and that made it even worse. The unknown was so much scarier than what you do know. And as the sound crept up the length of the tube, I thought I could almost see a shadow stretch out before the opening. 50. Something put a hand on the edge of the tube, its ghostly fingers clenching the rim. 52. Its shadow stretched out towards the mouth of the tube, the last light of day, sending it across the sand like a gantry. 55. My arms really began to shake now. I didn't think I could hold it much longer. 56. It was leaning down. I could see the top of its head as it made to peek into the tube. 58. I tried to shimmy myself farther back up the tube, but I was afraid that any noise or movement would give me away. It was too close. I had almost been home free, but as its lack of eyes found mine, it began to resonate again in that strange, musical way. Then it melted into nothing, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I had made it all 60 seconds, and as I slid down the slide and felt my feet touch the ground, a deep sense of relief filled me. It was dark now, the sun having actually set, and I hightailed it home without a care for what might have happened to Bobby. He had gotten me into this mess. He could walk home by himself. When I got home, though, my mom was on the phone with his mom. She wanted to know if I'd seen Bobby, because he had never come home from school. I told Mom that I had been walking him home, but that we had parted ways a couple of blocks from the house. She conveyed that to his mom, and she hoped that he'd be seen soon. When the police called a few hours later to ask the same questions, I gave them the same answers. I was pretty sure that I knew what had gotten him. The ghost kids had found him, and he had suffered whatever punishment came with it. They never found him, never even found a trace of him, but sometimes when I drive past that park, I feel moved to go call his name and see if maybe he'd like to play a game of hide and seek. It would confirm what I suspect already, but I'm just not brave enough to go down there and play again. It's been 20 years. I'm still not brave enough to face Bobby for a game of hide and seek.
Quite a tragic tale that seems to be expanding with every retelling. Coming up next, we have a story about a child who sees things after dark, things that may mean him harm. Let's hear a story about a monster.
There it was again. Jeremy put his hands over his ears and tried to block the noise out, but the scratching against the hardwood sent chills up his spine. Stop it! Stop it right now! Jeremy clapped his hands over his mouth, terrified at what he had just done. The scratching under his bed had been happening for 3 weeks. The scratching, the weird noises, and sometimes he thought he heard whispers and whimpers amongst the odd sounds. His parents had said, "Oh, you're just dreaming," or "It's just the house settling." But Jeremy knew that it was something. There was something under there. He knew it in that way that children always know. The scratching stopped, and he lay there, silently shivering with the covers pulled up to his chin. He had done it now. Now it would slink out from under his bed and eat him up. It would come towering out from under the bed and hurt him with its long claws, or... "Who's there?" said a small voice that was trying to be brave. Jeremy jumped. That had been a child's voice. The thing under his bed had spoken, and it was a kid, like him. He peeked over the edge of the bed, expecting yellow eyes or a mouthful of pointy teeth, but no one peeked out from under his bed. After a few seconds of heavy silence, Jeremy decided to be brave for a little while longer. I'm Jeremy Bird. Why have you been under my bed all these nights making noise?" "Me? You're the terrifying thing that's been making noise under my bed this whole time," said the voice. To Jeremy, it sounded terrified. "No, I haven't," Jeremy said, and he laughed at the absurdity. "Oh, yes, you have. You growl and roar deep in the night. I've heard you," said the monster, who was blustering with angry terror. Jeremy thought for a moment. "Does it sound like this?" He pretended to snore. He'd gotten pretty good at it. If he wanted to trick his parents, they could stay up a little later. The monster quailed in terror. "Oh no, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." "Shh, that's the noise I make when I sleep, silly," Jeremy said with a laugh. "Oh," said the monster, relieved. But what about that terrible squealing you make?" it added suspiciously. Jeremy thought about it, and as he thought, he leaned back on the bed, and the springs creaked and groaned. It chills me every time I hear it," said the monster with real terror. "That's just the mattress," Jeremy said. He was becoming less afraid of this monster, as it proved to be more fearful of him. "Well, what about those little noises you make at night? They're so invasive, they make me want to scream." Jeremy thought, what could the creature be talking about? He looked at the glow of the dark stars on his ceiling as he contemplated, and smiled as he remembered how his mom had pasted them up there. What small noises late at night could this creature be talking about? He thought and thought, and his silence made the monster cry a little, a high-pitched whine at the back of his throat that made Jeremy cringe. Those are whimpers," Jeremy realized suddenly, understanding the noise as soon as he heard it. "Why do you make that sound?" the monster asked, but Jeremy already knew the answer. "Because I'm scared of you," he said, feeling a tear slip down his cheek as he lay in his bed, a child's fear coming over him that his parents would never understand, and because no one believes me. There was silence for a minute. "I'm sorry," said the monster in a small little voice. Jeremy felt himself smile a little. "It's okay. I don't think you meant to scare me. It's just in your... No, not for that. Well, I am sorry for that, but I'm more sorry for what's about to happen to you." Jeremy tensed. "What do you mean?" "Well, I had 2 monsters, the one in my closet and you. When I told the closet monster I was more afraid of you than him, he told me that he could make you go away. He told me that if I distracted you, he'd catch you off guard and make sure you never scared me again." Jeremy was silent. "I'm sorry. Please, won't you forgive me?" Jeremy didn't answer. "Hello? Are you still there? Please don't be mad at me. I'm sorry." But Jeremy would never answer. The only sound to be heard was the soft drip on the floor and the closet door scratching as it was pulled shut from the inside.
Sometimes the flight of fancy that children have isn't so far off as you might think. Coming up next, we have a story about a troubling child who collects, well, let's say, strange things he finds here and there. But let's hear the story about too many teeth.
"Daddy, I lost a tooth." He lisped a bit as he said it, and as I held my hand out, I saw that he had, indeed, lost a tooth. It was one of the front ones, and I congratulated him on losing it so cleanly. I wondered if he had pulled it out himself, but I put that out of my mind. Brandon didn't even pull his own splinters out, and I really couldn't see him yanking out his own teeth. He was 6 and 1 month, as he liked to say, and this was the first tooth that he had lost. He was late in that respect. Many of his friends had already started losing baby teeth, but he was giddy as he brought this one to me. "Now, the tooth fairy will come and take it away," he said, skipping off to continue playing. Ah, yes, I'd forgotten about that part. Brandon had become obsessed with the tooth fairy after his friend Nina had lost her tooth. He thought of her like the blue fairy from the Pinocchio story, and he was very excited that she would come through his window and leave money for his teeth. He had asked what she did with all those teeth, where she got all the money, and 1,000 other things. I was a pretty creative person, and I'd come up with all kinds of stories about what she did with them, where she got the money, and how she came in without making a sound. On and on and on. I was kind of glad that he had finally lost a tooth, because I was starting to run out of material and thought if he experienced it, he might lose interest in it. We put it under his pillow that night, and I assured him that it would be gone in the morning and there would be money when he got up. Then, of course, I fell asleep waiting for my wife to get home and woke up to find her sleeping beside me and the sun already peeking over the horizon. I went quickly but quietly and thanked my lucky stars that Brandon was a sound sleeper. He hadn't woken up yet, and I took the $1 I was going to put under his pillow out of my pocket and prepared to make the swap. To my surprise, however, the tooth was already gone. No one had left money, but the tooth had disappeared. I looked around, thinking it had slipped out, but it was just gone. I left the $1 anyway, not wanting him to be disappointed, and went back to my room to get more shut-eye before the alarm went off. We never made it to the alarm because Brandon came in waving the $1 and saying that the tooth fairy had come. "Look what the tooth fairy left me. He said it was all for me." I told him that was awesome, but internally I raised an eyebrow. He? The tooth fairy had always been a woman anytime he'd talked about her before. Maybe, I thought, Brandon had just had a dream or something that night. He put the money in his piggy bank, and I figured we could maybe put the thing behind us. 2 days later, as I put him to bed, I put my hand beneath his pillow and felt something strange. I took my hand out and found another tooth. "What's this?" I asked. "Oh, I lost another tooth," Brandon said. No excitement, no hope that the tooth fairy would come, just a matter-of-fact tone. I guess that was what I wanted. His obsession with the tooth fairy had ended when he finally lost a tooth. He'd gone from being absolutely excited to absolutely unfazed, and that stopped me for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me you had another loose tooth, buddy?" I don't know. It just kind of happened. I put the tooth back under his pillow, telling him to make sure to say something next time, and then I kissed him goodnight and put him to bed. When I went to put the money under his pillow a little later, though, the tooth wasn't there. Instead, there was a coin. I took a look at it, thinking it was a $50, but realized I was wrong almost at once. At first, I thought it was one of those weird chocolate coins you sometimes got for Christmas. Turning it, I realized it was just extremely grubby. It was heavy, like it was made out of brass or copper, and the surface looked dirty, like it had been at the bottom of a well for quite some time. I started to take it with me, something in me wanting to keep it away from my son, but I put it back instead. It wasn't mine, after all, and by the look of it, it was probably something that he treasured. It had been back under his pillow for less than a second before his hand went searching for it. His fingers took hold of it almost greedily as he clutched it, and I decided to take the $1 back with me. Brandon changed a bit after that night, but it's only in retrospect that I see it. He became very secretive, not my little buddy like he used to be. Brandon didn't want to play video games in the living room with me anymore. He didn't want to read stories at bedtime either. He spent a lot of time in his room and seemed to be closing off. His mother laughed at me when I told her that my feelings were a little bit hurt by it. He's just being a kid. Kids go through phases sometimes. Don't take it so personally. A couple of months from now, he'll probably be back to his usual self again. I hoped he would, but it was hard to ignore the physical changes that were going on in him as well. Not only was Brandon quieter, but it seemed like he had grown. He hadn't gained a foot in a single week, but sometimes it seemed like his fingers were abnormally long, his arms strangely jointed, and his face was oddly stretched. He would look at me sometimes, look at me like he was thinking about doing something that he knew would make me angry. I didn't like it, but he never did it right out in the open. Like I said, Brandon never came to sit with me or play video games, but I would sometimes catch him peeking at me from the hallway or from under the table in the kitchen. It was creepy, but I figured it was just little kid behavior. A month after Brandon lost his first tooth, I found another one in his backpack. Well, no, not just one. I found 5 hidden in the front pocket of his backpack after he left it on the kitchen table when he went to go to the bathroom. He had become pretty protective of that backpack, putting it in his room or keeping it close by at all times, and I started getting suspicious of what might be in there. I didn't think it was drugs or anything. He was 6, but I thought it might be something weird or dangerous. What if he had a snake or something in there? So when he suddenly ran off to go to the bathroom, I knew this was my chance to have a look. I needed to sign his folder for school anyway, so I took out the folder and looked over the day's report before taking a peek in the pockets. The teeth were just sitting there, bumping together when I poked at them, but they didn't really look like human teeth. They looked more like animal teeth, and they were too strange to have come out of my son's mouth. They might have been from a cat or a dog, I suppose. Maybe a, "What are you doing?" I zipped the backpack and turned around, looking like I'd been caught doing something I shouldn't. "Nothing, just signing your folder." Brandon looked at me with a great deal of mistrust, taking the backpack and going to his room without putting his back to me. I told his mother about the teeth when she came back from work, but she brushed it off again, saying that little kids often collected strange things. "My brothers collected animal skeletons they found in the woods," she said dismissively, as we got ready for bed. "Thank goodness it's just teeth and not a whole skull." I let it go, but it was hard not to see what was going on. Brandon started looking like he wasn't sleeping well. He had huge bags under his eyes, and he was fidgety anytime he was made to sit still, like at dinner or for homework. He would get short and agitated, muttering to himself in a way I couldn't understand. I listened carefully once when he was doing math homework, and it sounded like he was talking in a different language. He looked up when he saw me noticing, squinting at me with that look of distrust, and it broke my heart to see him like that. Brandon had always been my little buddy, and this sudden change in him was painful to watch. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the school. They needed to speak with me about something important. Brandon, it seemed, had been in a fight where he had knocked more than a few of the kids' teeth out. I came down right away, afraid that Brandon had been hurt, but when I saw him sitting in the principal's office, he looked none the worse for wear. He had a bruise on his cheek, and his hands looked like he had beat them against a wall, but he didn't seem injured or in distress at all. Quite the contrary, Brandon looked happier than I had ever seen him. I took a seat next to him in the office, waiting to see what they thought was so important. "We called you in, not because Brandon has been fighting, but because of other rumors going around his class." "Rumors?" I asked. "Yes, sir. The student he fought with said Brandon had been making strange deals with other students." I shook my head, not quite understanding. "What kinds of deals?" "They say he's been buying people's teeth." I shuddered, thinking about the teeth in the bag I'd saw not too long ago. I looked down at Brandon, questioning him with my eyes as to whether it was true. He looked back at me without hesitation, pretty much letting me know that it was. He's been trading his lunch for them. He's been trading other things for them too, toys and small things. He's allegedly traded over 20 students for their teeth across 3 grades. Today, the student in question had taken the trade but refused to give him any teeth. Your son responded by beating the teeth out of his mouth. I looked down at Brandon, asking what he was thinking. He didn't bother to answer, just clenched his fists in his lap and looked at the floor. I think that was when it really hit me how much he had changed. The bags under his eyes were dark and deep, and his fingers were long enough that I couldn't see how anyone didn't notice. Each finger seemed twice as long as it should be, and as he clenched, I could see a 4th knuckle on each of them. The reason we called you in, sir, is, well, to get those teeth back. I turned and looked at the principal. What do you mean? He looked a little green as he wiped his forehead with a napkin. We believe your son has the missing teeth, but he won't tell us where they are, and he won't give them back to us. We can't seem to find them, and the mother is hopeful that the dentist can put them back in if they're not too badly damaged. If anything else, they want them back so they can take them to the dentist and make sure they're baby teeth and not permanent. Brandon hasn't said a word about where he put them, and we are deeply troubled by this behavior. I looked at Brandon and asked him where the teeth were. He shook his head, not saying a word. I asked him again, and when he shook his head this time, I heard something. Something nearly indistinguishable, but altogether unsettling. Something was rattling in his mouth. We can sit here until you decide to give us the teeth, but you're not leaving until we get them back. I don't know what's gotten into you, I said, but the idea that we wouldn't be leaving seemed to decide him. He bent slowly over the principal's desk, making eye contact with the older man the whole time as he opened his mouth. 3 teeth fell out as he pushed his tongue out, and none of them appeared to be his. The teeth clattered on the desk like old dice, and more than one of them had a root hanging from them. As he sat back up, I had the sneaking suspicion that he was holding out. The principal, however, seemed more than okay with what he had gotten back. He told us to go, saying that Brandon was suspended for 2 weeks, and I collected up my son as we headed for the door. The principal managed not to vomit before we got out of his office, but it was a near thing. We talked the entire way home. Well, I talked. Brandon just sat there and said nothing. I told him I didn't know what this was about, but that he needed to stop. This wasn't him. This wasn't like him, and he needed to tell me what was going on so I could help. I was his dad. I wanted to help him, but I couldn't help him if he didn't talk to me. The whole time he just sat there and stared at me. Most kids who are being chastised look out the window or look at their feet, but he stared directly at me in brazen defiance. His fingers kept flexing, and I saw him put a hand to his pocket more than once. I wanted to tell him to turn them out, to give me the tooth from that kid that he had kept, but something in me didn't quite dare. I was loath to admit it, but I was a little bit afraid of my son in that moment. He looked nothing like the boy that I had known for almost 7 years. My grandma used to tell me stories about babies taken by fairies and the changelings they left behind. This reminded me of those stories. The kid in front of me was so fundamentally different from the one I knew that it was almost like talking to a different person. As we pulled up in the yard, I told him he was grounded. No tablet, no TV, no dessert. But Brandon didn't seem to care. He just walked inside and went to his room. His tablet was still on the charger, and his TV remote was left hanging off the door to his room. I didn't know what he was doing in there, but it clearly wasn't playing. He was way too quiet, and when his mother called to tell me that she was working a double, I almost cried. I didn't want to be alone with him for longer than I had to be. and that made me feel even worse. He didn't come out for dinner, and when I went to bring him a plate a little while later, I heard muffled voices as he spoke to someone. I tried to get the teeth, but they caught me. I didn't know who he was talking to. Kinda thought he might be talking to himself, but when a gruff voice responded, I felt my stomach drop. "You'll just have to do better next time." The voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was deep and watery, like something from the bottom of a well, and it spoke in a way that made its mouth sound strangely full. It was devoid of any sort of kindness or charity, the sounds you sometimes hear when people speak to children. It was an authoritative voice, a teacher, and they were not pleased with my son. "I'm grounded. They suspended me from school. I'm not going to be able to get you any teeth for at least 2 weeks. "Your father has teeth," it said matter-of-factly. "Your mother has teeth too." When he answered, he didn't sound afraid. When he answered, it was with cold assuredness. "They won't just give them to me. They don't understand what I'm doing." What was he doing? That's what I wanted to know. I gripped the doorknob, hoping they wouldn't hear me, and that was when the voice said something that made my blood run cold. "Then do not ask them. Take them, like you did from the boy today." I opened the door in one fluid motion, and my son looked up guiltily as I walked into the room. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. "No one," he said, much too quickly. "I heard someone," I said. "I heard someone in here talking to you, and I want to know who it was and where they went." That was a lie. I didn't think I wanted to know who they were. What I wanted was for them to never come back. The person had sounded like some kind of demonic fairy from a kid's story, and I was afraid of what I would see if he did come back. "It's nothing," Brandon said quickly. Too quickly. I was doing voices." I talked to him for a little while longer, but I got nothing. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't tell me anything, and eventually I just left. I should have left it at that. I should have just left it alone. But I had to try one more time. It was late, about 10:30, which is pretty late for us, and I decided to try a peace offering. I felt pretty certain he was still awake. I had heard something moving around in there, so I cut some of the pie I had made to go with dinner and walked to his room. I was going to offer him the pie and see if maybe we could talk. I just wanted to know what it was that had made him change so much. Most of all, I just wanted my son back. It killed me to have him act like this, but as the door came open, I got more answers than I had bargained for. It was standing over his bed, its arm going under his pillow, and in the darkness of his room, I realized it had to be what he'd been talking to. The pie fell to the ground, but I had a death grip on the plate. I realized later I had sprained my thumb once I was in any state to feel anything. I didn't speak. I could barely breathe, and as the thing turned to look at me, I realized my fairy theory might not be too far off. It was grubby looking, like something that's been living in a ditch. Its features were completely covered in something dark that had the texture of earth, except for the two large lamp-like eyes that protruded from its face like bubble lights. It was tall, something I realized as it took its full height. It had been crouched before, putting something under my son's pillow, and it had to stoop so as not to bang its head on the ceiling, which was about 9 feet from the floor. From its back, 4 insectile wings protruded. They weren't large enough to carry it, but they were large enough to be noticeable. Its hands and arms, the fingers multi-jointed, were far from delicate looking as it wiggled them ceaselessly. I expected it to charge me. I expected it to attack me, but instead, it raised one huge finger to its face and made a shushing sound. "Shh! You'll wake the baby," it whispered, and its mouth sounded like it was trying to swallow something. Then it smiled, and I saw not a double, but a triple row of teeth inside its mouth. There's no order to them. Molars next to canines, next to bicuspids, next to what appear to be fangs and shark teeth. Its mouth is such a mishmash of teeth, it's impossible not to feel a little woozy when you look at it. It pulled its lips down, somehow containing all those teeth, and before my eyes, it vanished. My son was pretty upset when I grabbed him and carried him out of the house. I put him in the car, and we waited till his mother got off work before taking him to a nearby motel. I told her what I'd seen as best I could, and I think she believed there might be something going on now. My son is furious, saying that he needs to get back home so he can do his job, but he won't say what that is. Honestly, I think he's been collecting teeth for whatever that thing was. When I went back inside to get some clothes and check the house, I looked under his pillow and found another one of those strange coins. There's a box under his bed, too, and inside it's equal parts teeth and coins. There are around 20 of them, and they're sitting next to teeth of every shape and every size. Most of them are animal teeth, but some of them are definitely human teeth. I've taken the entire box with me, but the phone call I got from my wife before I left the house was what really worried me. She called to tell me that our son had locked himself in the bathroom, and she was afraid he was hurting himself. There's a weird squelching noise, followed by him yelling and crying. He'd locked himself in the bathroom, but I went to the manager to unlock it for us. What we found in there will stick with me for a long time. We're at the hospital now. My wife is in the ER room with him while I sit in the waiting room and wait for updates. Protocol states only one parent can go in at a time, and my son doesn't want me to go in there. He can't speak very well, but he made that very clear to my wife. I gave him space, not wanting to exacerbate his condition any more than I have to. I've got the box on my lap as I sit out here, and I'm not really sure what to do with it. Inside are the 8 teeth that he managed to pull out of his own head before we got him restrained. Whatever this creature is, it must get its due, and my son is apparently intent on giving it that due. We'll probably end up having to take him to a mental facility, but I know he isn't crazy. I saw that thing too, and I know it'll find him no matter where we take him. So be careful when you tell your kids about the tooth fairy. What comes to collect their teeth might be something far worse than even you can imagine.
One more story for you, and I think I've saved something pretty good for last. It's a story about a child and his father who are having a difference of opinion, and how far that difference might go. So let's hear a story about the silent treatment.
It was a fight like any of the others we had recently had. Little did I know, it would be the last fight we ever had, though. Our fight was about grades. They all seemed to be about grades at that time. He'd been heading out the door, dressed to go hang out in the woods with his little hoodlums he called friends. I suspected they were drinking, and I was absolutely sure they were out there smoking. I was tired of cleaning up after him and watching him slip slowly into delinquency. He told me he'd be back, and I told him to stop and come have a seat instead. He glowered at me from the door, knowing what I wanted to talk about, and not liking it. He slammed the door and came to sit on the couch, knowing he was about to sit down for another ass chewing. His grades had come in, and they were the worst they had ever been. When I told him this, he said it wasn't his fault. I sighed. It was never his fault. Nothing was ever his fault. There was always someone else to blame, someone else to point the finger at, and it was never up to him to take responsibility. This was old ground. We retread it for the 1,000th time, it seemed. He would have to repeat the 11th grade at this rate. He said he didn't care. He would have to quit his job if he couldn't keep his grades up. He didn't care about that either. I would snatch everything but his air. His car, his games, his computer, everything that mattered to him, and he would be stuck with nothing but studying. And that was the stroke that finally got through to him. Mom never had to stoop to this. Mom always knew there was a better way than to just punish me all the time. He said exactly what he knew I needed to hear to lose my temper. Well, she isn't here, is she, Marcus? She's dead. Or have you forgotten? I could see by his pained expression that I'd touched a nerve. How could either of us forget that little fact? It just hadn't felt like home here without her. We had done a lot of fighting, staying cooped up in our rooms, and not a lot of talking about the hurt we both felt at her passing. She had always kept us from escalating to this level of arguments that would quickly come to the cusp of violence, I was starting to believe. My wife had been the pillar that held our relationship up. My wife had been dead for almost a year now, and it had been the worst year of my life. She died very suddenly, painlessly, the EMTs told me. She had been turning into the grocery store to get our weekly shopping list done when a bus had struck her car. Her car had rolled 4 times before coming to rest against a tree, and the impact had killed her even as it smashed in the doors of the car. I can remember when I'd gotten the phone call, sitting at my desk and preparing to file some reports. I had given bad news to spouses like this 1,000 times when I was on the force, but it's different when that kind of horror visits you personally. We buried her in the family plot, and the 2 of us had gone home to try and make the most of the house we had left. We had fought bitterly nearly every day since. I saw Marcus tear up and turn away before he could see my eyes filling up as well. I hate you. Sometimes I wish I'd been in that car with her. That took me back a moment, and I answered out of anger before I could stop myself. Sometimes, son, I wish you had too. We were silent for a solid minute before he got up and walked slowly towards the hallway. Then don't bother worrying about me anymore. Maybe I'll go talk to Mom, see if she wants to listen. Then he stomped down the hallway and slammed his door behind himself, leaving me alone to feel like a shitty parent and the worst person alive. I spent the next few hours bustling about to distract myself. I made dinner, folded some laundry, and generally picked up while dinner boiled and simmered. When it finally finished, I assembled it on a plate and took it to the door of his room, intending it to be a peace offering. Marcus. I called his name softly, knocking on the door and leaning in to listen. The other side of the door was quiet, not a sound to be heard, but I thought I could hear the creak of the mattress as its occupant rolled over. I sighed. He was ignoring me. That made me angry. I was trying to extend an olive branch, and here he was ignoring me. Well, dinner's in the fridge when you decide to stop being mad, I said. His dinner went into the fridge, and I decided to flip on my Xbox and try to block out his childish behavior. I was still playing later when I heard the door creak open and the light footsteps he always used when he was trying to sneak out of his room. I ignored him as he scuttled up the hallway, clearly checking to see if I was in the living room. It had gotten dark a few hours ago. A check of the time showed me it was 10 o'clock, and I was a little angry that he was still awake. As he crossed behind the couch, I told him to get his food and go to bed. You don't need to stay up all night. He didn't say anything. He just scuttled off to his room and closed the door. I went back to playing my game, and about an hour later I took myself off to bed. I locked my door, just in case, but I wasn't expecting any trouble. My son was a hothead, just like his old man, but he wasn't usually violent. He was a good kid, but it was hard to see the good under all that yelling. I wish now that I had looked harder. Maybe I could have prevented what came next. The next day was Saturday, and I spent the day cleaning and catching up on things. I didn't see my son all day. He didn't come out for meals or just to ask me if he could have any of the myriad of things returned for the weekend. This wasn't out of the ordinary for him. Last summer, he would just stay up all night, and we'd never see him until morning, or the few times he got a wild hair to wake up early. After last night, I was a little glad he didn't come out. Truth be told, I didn't really want to see him, and his silence was kind of nice. When noon rolled around and I hadn't heard the flush of a toilet or the footsteps across the floor, I became a little concerned. I went to his door and knocked, calling his name, expecting to hear some response. There was nothing, not a sound from inside, and I started to feel angry again. I remembered how he had iced me out the night before and left without saying anything. If he wanted to play the silent treatment game, so could I. I didn't think about it again until I was getting ready for bed, his door still not having rattled all day. I showered, took my sleep aid, and went to bed, Getting comfy down under the covers, I started to think that maybe I should be more concerned. Was he sick? Hurt? Perhaps he was waiting for me to apologize so he could get back on even footing. I got half out of bed before my anger flared up again. He just wanted me to be the first one to crack. I rolled back in bed, putting the pillow over my head as I tried to fall asleep. I wasn't going to play these games with him. I was not going to be the first one to crack. I awoke in the middle of the night to a loud crashing noise in the kitchen. I was next to the bed in a heartbeat, police training taking over, finding the box that held my handgun. I crept towards the bedroom door, quiet as a mouse, as the destruction continued to cascade around the kitchen. I wrapped my hand around the doorknob, just as a sound like a stove tipping over crunched across the house. I winced, wondering who the hell was making such a ruckus in my kitchen. It had to be some meth head or something. No burglar would be this incompetent. I opened the door quietly and tiptoed through the living room, boxer shorts being my only covering. The noise had stopped after the loud crash, but I was taking no chances. The last thing I wanted to do was get jumped on as I came around the corner, and I kept my gun up and at the ready. When I peeked around the edge of the bar, I could see a huge mess spreading across the usually pristine kitchen. The refrigerator doors were open, food and juice spilling everywhere, and the stove was indeed flipped onto its face as it lay on the floor. Bakelite glass was scattered across the ground and added to the overall catastrophe that had stretched across the kitchen. Of my intruder, however, there was no sign. I searched across the house and found no one. The door was locked, front and back, and none of the windows were open. It was pretty clear that no one had broken in to trash my kitchen, and I could feel my anger flare up again as I looked at the disaster. Only one person could have been responsible for this, and he was currently pretending I didn't exist. This time, I hammered on the door. "What the hell? You ruined my kitchen, wasted my food, and just scuttle back off to your hole? Get your ass out here and help me clean this shit up." No sound came from inside. I was furious. Did he think he could just wreck the house and then ignore me? Who the hell did he think he was? He was on thin ice, and if this was how he wanted to act, I would be suggesting to his grandmother tomorrow that maybe he ought to go live with her for a while. He was 17 after all, and if he wanted to act like an idiot, I was tempted to call the police. Let him spend a night in jail, if that's how he wanted to act. I threw the door open then, and there he was, lying with his back to me, under his heavy comforter. "Get your ass up. You can help me clean up this mess, and then we can have a long talk about why you think it's okay to destroy my kitchen." He lay still, ignoring me, giving me the literal cold shoulder. I took a step into his room, fists balled up as I prepared to turn him over roughly, and shouted at him until he decided to listen. I stopped myself, though, after that first step. Maybe this was what he wanted. If I had considered that the police might solve my problem for me, then surely he had as well. He was hoping I would get rough with him so he could get me in trouble. Well, I was not about to play right into his hands. I grabbed the chair from beside his door and wedged it up under the doorknob as I closed it behind myself. Good luck wrecking the place now, asshole. I didn't sleep that night. I cleaned the kitchen before dragging myself back to bed just as the sun came up. I was filthy, sweaty, and smelled strongly of pine sol. The kitchen had taken a lot of work, and I fell into a filthy, thin sleep as I lay in my bed. My dreams were full of wrecked kitchens, thankless children, and lots of screaming. I slept poorly despite my tiredness and woke up grumpy and sore. I saw that the chair was still there as I walked to the bathroom and sniffed. He probably could have opened that door, but it would have taken a lot of shoving. Likely his activities from the night before had taken a lot out of him, and now he was too tired to get up. Oh well, I thought. He'll get hungry sometime, and then he'll have to come out and talk to me. I showered, ate a late breakfast, and busied myself with the rest of the day. I kept listening for him, expecting him to curse as he discovered the chair I'd pushed under his door, or flush a toilet, but he never made a peep. His room was as quiet as a tomb, and he never so much as turned on the TV or walked to the bathroom. That should have raised a red flag with me, but I was still so mad from the night before. If he wanted to starve in there, let him do it, I suppose. I left him alone, and when it was time for bed, I crawled in gladly and was snoozing about the time my head hit the pillow. I heard the chair scrape harshly across the floor about 11, and I climbed out of bed to go catch him leaving his room as the sounds became harsher still. I got about halfway across the bedroom when something hit my door hard enough to rattle it in its frame. I took a step back, startled, waiting to see if he would knock it down or simply keep battering at it. After the sounds of breaking wood rattled across the room, I realized the something was the chair I had put under my son's door. After the chair shattered, he started battering the door with his fists, and I reached for the handgun on my nightstand, even as I reached for the phone on my charger. I dialed 911 and laid the phone against my ear, pointing the gun at the door steadily. I didn't want to shoot my son, but if he came in meaning to harm me, I would do what I had to do. The operator picked up on the second ring. 911, what is your emergency? I told them that I needed some officers to come to my address. I told them that my son was acting violently, possibly under the influence, and I desperately needed help. The operator could hear the sounds of someone trying to batter my door in, and said that she would dispatch help right away. She told me to stay on the line, and I did just that. My aim shook a little as something put a fist-sized hole in my door. The frame shook and the surface bulged as whatever was trying to break in tore through the first layer of the door and into the interior. I haven't prayed since my wife died, but I prayed then that whatever God resided over all wouldn't make me shoot this child I had raised. I saw something crawl through the hole in the blackness of the dark room and reach for the doorknob. I leveled my gun and prepared to fire if the door opened. It slid around the knob, and I heard it twist just before the lock caught. Thankfully, I had remembered to lock the door. It had fumbled at the simple turn lock when the first blue and whites flashed through the windows. The black thing retreated then, and the silence that followed it was almost deafening. I snuck across the room to the door, gun leading as I peeked out into the hallway. The shadowy hall was empty, the door to the living room closed, and I shoved the door open noisily as it hung broken on the hinges. The police were banging on the door, calling to see if someone would let them in. I put the gun on the bookshelf by my door, not wanting to get shot myself, and I called to them to tell them that I was the caller and I was opening the door. The door came open, and they had their hands on their holsters, waiting to see who would open the door. They took in my boxer shorts and my scared face and asked me what had happened. I told them everything. I told them about the fight I'd had with my son. I told them about how he'd been in his room for days on end, only coming out at night to eat or cause trouble. I told them about the mess in the kitchen, even showing them some pictures I'd taken on my phone. I told them about the silent treatment we'd been engaged in for the last few days, and how tonight had simply been the icing on the cake. They agreed to come with me to talk to him. I knocked on the door, already knowing what I'd find. There was no response. The cops looked at me skeptically, but I told them this was just how he'd been lately. I opened the door to find him turned away from the door, blankets pulled up over himself, the same way he had been the last time I tried to talk to him. Marcus, you need to stop playing games and talk to these men. You went too far. My door is destroyed. You need to get up and tell them what you did. Marcus said nothing. That's when my temper flared again, and I strode forward to yank the blankets off the bed. Get the hell up. Stop being such a child. I know you can... When the blankets came off, I saw the dried blood soaked into the mattress. It had pooled on the floor beside the bed, and Marcus lay on his side as his eyes stared sightlessly at the wall. His body had begun to bloat, the skin blackening, and his wrists were jagged rips up his arm. The knife he had used was still clutched in his hand, and the blade was dark with dried blood. I spent several hours in the police station, shaking and trying to come to terms with what had happened. The cops hadn't put me in handcuffs. Professional courtesy, I guess. But they had implied that they suspected this wasn't as cut and dry as it looked. I suspected that they thought I had attempted to cover up a murder, but when the coroner's report came back, they determined that he'd been dead for a few days. The going consensus was he had killed himself after our last fight. They found a note on his desk, and if they hadn't already thought I was a shitty parent, that certainly sealed it. Not only had I essentially let my son kill himself and ignored him for the next 2 days, but I had driven him to it as well. The note he'd left said, "If you wish I had died in that crash so much, then let me just give you what you want. I'll be sure to tell Mom why I'm here so soon." They cut me loose an hour ago, but all I can do is sit in my car and shake. Part of it's grief. I can't believe I have to go back to that empty house by myself. I can't believe we'll never be able to put all this behind us and move on. I can't believe I'll never get to see him grow up, have kids of his own. I've lost everything now. My son, my wife, everything that made my house a home. But I'd be lying if I said that it wasn't fear as well. Because if my son was dead, what was the thing that destroyed my kitchen and came after me tonight? It passed within a few inches of me on that first night, and thinking back on that makes me shiver. The cops ignored me when I asked what I was supposed to do about whatever attacked me tonight. I know they think I'm making it up, trying to garner some kind of sympathy for my negligence, but I know what I saw. I saw that long, shadowy arm creep into the hole in my door. If it wasn't my son, then what the hell was that? As I sit in my car writing this, I don't know if I'll ever go home again. I don't even know if I have a home anymore.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back again tomorrow with more great stories to take you into the weekend here on Cozy Horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.